Kickstarter calls MS-13 a marginalized group, deplatforms conservative comic creator whose hero is depicted beating up gang members who were mugging a woman. Hello, this is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button. Today we're going to be talking about crowdfunding, comic books, and MS-13, how they kind of all tie together. There was a situation where a conservative comic book creator was deplatformed from the crowdfunding website Kickstarter, apparently because the vigilante hero is called Lone Star, is beating up gang members who were saving a black woman from being mugged. This was by Mike S. Miller. He's about 3 decades long comic book veteran. And he has a book. Now it's on Indiegogo, where he's raising money. He's actually been very successful raising money on Indiegogo. He's raised more than $350,000 with more than 6,000 backers combined on all of his projects over the past year. And he decided he wanted to actually go to Kickstarter and expand his market a little bit and go to a little bit of a different audience. And initially his project was approved. He's saying, thank you, Kickstarter. And he was ready to go until he says he started posting some artwork from the campaign that depicted the hero beating up the gang members and rescuing the woman. And then he gets this letter from Kickstarter saying, hi, Mike, thanks for sharing your project with us. We've carefully reviewed it, and it's against our rules. As a public benefit corporation committed to fighting inequality and creating a more equitable world, Kickstarter does not allow discrimination, subjugation, or intolerance towards marginalized groups. Marginalized group, MS-13, what are they talking about? If you actually look at the comic now, you'll see the depiction. Here's the woman, she's getting mugged. And then the hero comes in, and he's like Batman or Daredevil, and he's beating up the criminals with his bare hands and disarming them. And that's what they're saying is a marginalized group. I don't think that's really I think that's an unbelievable decision by them. MS-13 has been called by the Justice Department. This is a briefing from them. MS-13 in the Americas, how the world's most notorious gang defies logic, resists destruction. If you look at the blotter on the Justice Department, here in May, there was 3 alleged MS-13 gang members indicted in connection with murder, kidnapping and murder. That's usually the MO there. In February, the same thing happened where 11 members were indicted for their role in kidnapping and murdering 2 juveniles. ALG were based out of Fairfax, Virginia. I recall seeing this in the news, a big tragedy in the area. And this just keeps happening and happening and happening. There are hundreds of cases, and the federal prisons are filled with gang members, not just MS-13, but other gangs as well. And they're dangerous, and they're up to no good. They're criminal gangs. They're not marginalized group. They're not being discriminated against. According to the Justice Department white paper, again, MS-13 in the Americas by Insight Crime Investigation and Analysis of Organized Crime, quote, violence is a major part of the glue that binds the MS-13. It is part of every stage of an MS-13 member's life. Potential members commit violent acts to be considered for membership and ultimately to gain entry. They are beaten into the gang in a ritual that has left more than one permanently scarred. They move up the gang ladder by putting in the work and showing commitment, euphemisms for committing violent acts in the name of the gang. Its rivalry with the Barrio 18 means the MS-13 is in a constant state of war. It is also facing down challenges from security forces. It operates amid potential informants. In this environment, commitment is not just a means to move up the ladder, it is about survival. It is not surprising then that the gang has integrated this into its lexicon. Members are, as they say, soldiers. Now, the briefing also details some of the gruesomeness of the murders committed by the gang, and I'm going to share it with you not because it's pleasant, but to illustrate that these guys are bad news. Quote, in the MS-13, all members must do missions, and during a mission, all members must participate. In some cases, this means repeatedly hacking a victim with a machete. Refusal means almost certain death since the member or aspiring member is a potential witness. The weapon of choice frequently is a knife, a machete, or a baseball bat. The gang's murder victims have signs of repeated blows and stab wounds and are sometimes partially or completely dismembered. The authorities that inspected a scene in Long Island where 2 teenage girls were killed in 2016 with baseball bats, for example, told Insight Crime the victims looked like they had been run over by a car. I just covered the May and February indictments, which are just examples, by the way. There are many, many, many others. And this is what they're calling a marginalized group. I don't think so. This is political correctness run amok by Kickstarter. And really, but if you take the logic of it, like any standard crime drama you see on prime time, or even the Emmy Award-winning series Breaking Bad, it won Best Drama Series, Best Actor, and so forth. It depicted Mexican drug cartels and their gang enforcers who murder children. They would be ineligible for funding on Kickstarter by the logic of this, because in its apparent view, these gangs are not bloodthirsty murderers who dismember their victims. They're actually victims who are being discriminated against. Meanwhile, back in reality, and to do with this comic book, it's not unsurprising that gangs would find their way into a comic book to be portrayed as villains. You see, for example, Batman, he's always fighting organized crime and mobsters, whatever. I mean, are they Italian mobsters, Russian mobsters, Irish mafia, and so on and so forth? These are things that you just normally see in a comic book, and it's not controversial. It's not political per se. Now, the creator, he can be political. He's a devout Christian. He's a political conservative. He's a supporter of President Donald Trump. Again, this is Mike S. Miller. He's the creator of Lone Star. In a July 24 interview with fellow comic creator Jason Brubaker, he says that, quote, "A couple of years ago, this blonde fellow, Trump, got elected president, and it gave me this surge of hope again that I could actually do something." So the election of Trump actually inspired Miller to go off and start his own small business and make his own comic books. He's worked for almost 3 decades at DC, Marvel, and Image on doing comic books. As Miller explained, quote, "I've been writing. I never stopped creating. So I've been creating stuff for 30 years. Having been a publisher, I was like, there's no hope for starting another publishing company because it's insane. But I had all this content, all these intellectual properties, movie treatments, drawings and all this stuff. And I've just done over the years. And I'm like, when I had that burst of hope, I'm like, I'm going to do something with this. I sat down and wrote out a white paper on Blacklist Comics. Now, Blacklist, that's his publishing imprint. I reached out to Miller on Twitter, and I was asking, what about this? And he said that he had been intending to build up his own company for a while. My business model simply changed when the crowdfunding aspect became so viable via influencing marketing through YouTube. And then he posted a video, and then I asked him about the politics of it. Was it really Trump who inspired you? And he said, indeed. I had hope for the future I hadn't felt in a decade. It was then that I decided to get to work on my plan. So, and sometimes he'll post political stuff on Twitter, etc. But here you have a conservative creator. He supports Trump. He's out with his politics, and I think that's why Kickstarter, in part, is saying that they can't have his book on their website. It's because they disagree with the politics of it, even though it's not political. That's not the point of the book. It's actually, there's more to it than that. In any event, Miller, he actually got involved with other crowdfunding creators on social media who are professionals as well. One of them was Ethan Van Sciver. He says, encouraged him to put his projects on Indiegogo. He says he was making all this money on YouTube, and he's like, dude, get your YouTube channel up and going. And I'm like, okay. And I started doing my YouTube channel, and he's like, the secret is you got to do stuff every day. And then, he didn't start out with that many subscriptions. He started out with about 1,000. But by the end of his campaign, he had raised $113,000 for his book. He also mentions Richard C. Meyer, another crowdfunding comic book creator. He was actually a comic book fan who reviewed books, and then he went in and said, you know what, I'm going to make my own comic books. And I think that's great. I love comic books. I got to admit, you probably noticed the Phoenix from the X-Men over my left shoulder there. I actually drew that. I've been drawing comics since I was in high school, and I went to art school, and then eventually I went to get a political science degree and studied that whole thing. And so in another lifetime, I might have gone to comic book school, but here I am. I'm doing mostly political and economic analysis, and that's my life. I noticed these indie comic creators, and I started reaching out to them, and I started backing their projects, and I just love this stuff. Demons, Volume 1 through 3, Ardena, Agent Paso, The Gods Fear Me. Let's see, Vestige, Wisdom Comes. That one didn't fund, so I got a refund on that one. Sovereign, Soulfinder, Detective Dead, Doomkicker, Mary Sue, Gunship, Thunder Punch, Starblades, Off-Worlder, that one got refunded. Graveyard Shift. There's more. Earthworm Jim, Jawbreakers, Brand, Black and White, Lone Star, Monster Hunt, The Case of the Littlest Umbrella, Trixie Kane, Long Harbor, Meg, Six Gun Samurai, Deal with the Devil, Lady Alchemy, Jungle Comics, Cyberfrog, Red Rooster. Red Rooster looks really cool. Demons, I just bought Volume 3, and I had gotten Volume 2 and Volume 1. And those are the books that I've been backing. I've actually covered some of these creators before, and I was trying to make a point about how conservatives could actually, if they don't like liberal pop culture, they can actually go create their own culture. It's not just conservatives, anyone who's independent-minded or just thinks that the stuff you see out of Hollywood nowadays is just too political, too biased. There are creators out there who actually want to make their own stuff. And so I covered that. I thought it was really interesting. And one of the things that ties these creators in this particular little comic book genre, indie comics, is these guys, Richard C. Meyer, John Malin, Van Sciver, Miller, and they all are outspoken critics of the comic book industry and pop culture that they say has become too biased and saturated with diversity-driven political agenda being run by social justice warriors. And apparently so is Kickstarter, because they're not going to run any of their books over there. I suppose I'm not surprised, but they do. The thing is that Kickstarter has comic books on it. It's just that I guess you have to be liberal or some sort of social justice warrior in order to be listed there. Because if you speak out against it, they're coming after you. And so maybe it's just because Miller was a part of these indie comics who criticized pop culture. But I mean, his comic is very, I think, actually timely. And I think they're trying to say that the MS-13 gang is a marginalized group and that they're being discriminated against. They probably don't like President Trump and the fact that he's fighting illegal immigration, wants to build a wall, and he's deporting gang members or imprisoning, as the case may be, when they're convicted of crimes. And so I think that's just wrong. But the reason I cover, some of these other creators is the fact that they are very much dependent upon social media and big tech companies. They're using Indiegogo. They have YouTube channels that they use to build their audiences. Miller says he uses Facebook to promote his comic books when he's selling them. And that this all works in tandem. They're on Twitter. They've got followers on Twitter. Here's Miller. He actually responded to Kickstarter. He said, "Hey, Team Kickstarter, it's nice to see you consider MS-13 a marginalized group, since that's the only people who are being subjugated in the artwork I provided. More wokeness from the tech companies on display." And I think that's actually a danger for small businesses, not just comic book creators or anyone involved in trying to sell books, but just in general, that these big tech companies, they can do a lot to harm a business. In this case, they're sending him a letter and basically saying, you can't platform with us because you're a racist. Now, the same thing actually happened to a couple of these other creators, Richard C. Meyer and John Malin, with their book Jawbreakers. They tried to go to Kickstarter and it didn't work. They got pretty much the identical letter. It said, "Oh, you're racist. You can't be on Kickstarter." So they went to Indiegogo, and now Indiegogo is making a lot of money funding these guys. And these offerings have been really, really successful. I mean, the Richard C. Myers books, the Jawbreakers, have raised over $627,000 with his first two offerings. Let's see, the Cyberfrog Van Sciver comic, that's almost raised $1 million, $932,000 in 4 offerings. There's so much demand, he has to keep putting it back up on Indiegogo. Wouldn't be surprised if he does it again. It's actually available right now. If you click on the article in the video, you can actually, I linked through to all these campaigns that are still on. John Malin, he actually drew the first Jawbreakers, then he went over to do his own creation called Graveyard Shift. That's raised $280,000 in its offerings. And so these guys are being really creative. I think they're kind of brave, going to start small businesses, and that's the American dream. I think that, everyone wants to go start their own business and do their own thing. And, in this case, they get to have fun and make comic books. That's awesome. I'm kind of envious, actually. I might have to go sit down in my drawing table and draw something and try to sell a book or something. Nobody will buy it, of course, but it'll be fun to print it and give it to my son and say, hey, buddy, look what you can do. If you really put your mind to it, you can make a book. In any event, I'll leave you with the close here. I think these guys are awesome, all of them. I've supported as many campaigns as you can see there, and I'm really looking forward to receiving them. It can take a little bit longer. They're not Marvel. They don't have all these resources, so they're doing the best they can. They're small businesses, and again, that's the American dream. That's what it's all about. Now, if big tech platforms want to, they can exert political and cultural bias and suppress small businesses' exposure when they speak out against it. If it were done on account of race, sex, or religion, these would be clear-cut civil rights violations. But members of Congress have not yet extended public accommodation civil rights laws to cover political, philosophical, or cultural views. We've looked at this in the past where there's tech bias with going after these creators and other people. Facebook briefly took down Candace Owens' page. James Woods had his Twitter account locked up and suspended for something that he posted. Steven Crowder was demonetized on YouTube. And so I think this is a coming social tyranny of basically thought police that are going to be all politically correct. If you're not a leftist or some sort of social justice warrior, you're not allowed on these venues eventually, maybe. And so this could be really, really dangerous because it could really sow the conditions necessary for something like one-party rule, and you're not allowed to dissent against it. And so I think that's a real danger, and it's something that Congress might want to look at. They should maybe extend public accommodations laws. This is a big part of civil rights law, prohibition against discrimination or segregation in places of public accommodation. Usually it's focused on racial discrimination, sexual discrimination, religious discrimination. But in this case, maybe Congress could expand it under its interstate commerce powers under Article 1 to include political, philosophical, or cultural views. And then you won't have people, just because they're wearing a Make America Great Again hat, being denied services at a restaurant or something like that. Or at least that would be a violation. It would create a disincentive against behaving that way. You could define these big social media websites that offer public services ostensibly to everybody as public accommodations. You do it carefully so that you're narrowly and on a limited basis. Americans for Limited Government, you do it on a narrow basis so that you're not overreaching. Others have called for antitrust litigation against these big tech giants, and they may be in violation of antitrust law, but that's a separate track. It's not going to stop them from deplatforming conservative and other independent mind thinkers. So I think that Congress should take a look at this, maybe expand civil rights laws to prevent this sort of deplatforming that's occurring right now. And they should be looking at this, because we could have a thought police and it creates social tyranny. That's the commentary. This is Robert Romano, Vice President of Public Policy with Americans for Limited Government, dailytorch.com. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications. Have a good day.